about that. Right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining the GLASE webinar. My name is Erico Matos. I'm the Executive Director of the Greenhouse Lighting Systems and Engineering Consortium at Cornell University and RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. The GLASE webinar series is a selection of live recorded online presentations that cover a broad range of topics at varying technical levels and scales. These webinars feature the latest technology innovations and best practices in the CEA field, providing the audience the opportunity to discover new solutions and to connect with field experts. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speakers, Dr. Anu Rangarajan and White Marshall from Cornell University. They will be talking about their CEA workforce development study entitled, "What Makes a Successful Indoor Farmer Operations Manager?" That's a new topic for us today. That's really exciting. It has been a request from several of the GLASE members in our more broad network. So really excited with that. Anu is the director of the Cornell Small Farm Program in the School of Integrative Plant Science at Cornell University. Anu conducts research on vegetable production and oversees a portfolio of 24 online courses and in-person meeting trainings that build business and production skills over 3,500 farmers per year. Anu is also a co-principal investigator at the CEA Viability in Metro Areas study. Also presenting the webinar today, White Marshall is a research associate at Cornell University and a PhD candidate at the Department of History of Science at Harvard University. As a final year PhD candidate in the Anthropology of Technology and Agriculture, his dissertation examines the rise of vertical farming in New York City. White is also a research associate on the Infields project and serves as a board member at the Farm Tech Society. Like all the other webinars, a recorded version of this presentation today will be available at the GLASE website, glase.org, where you can find all the previous webinars and also register for the upcoming ones. If you have any questions during this presentation, or if you'd like to get in contact with the speakers, please submit your inquiries using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to answer all these questions by the end of the presentation today. With that said, it is my pleasure to give the word to Dr. Anu. Anu? Great,
thank you. And thank you all for joining us. What White and I hope to do with you is to share a bit about our work, our thinking, the logic behind how we're exploring this question about what makes a successful indoor farm operations manager. How we came to land on that title, as well as then what we hope to do next. And really, we want to share this all with you as a plea for your help, because we need your involvement in order to create and build really vibrant and responsive curricula. So in the end, you're not off scot-free. We are going to ask you to please help us with the next steps. So what we're going to do today is just to give you a brief background on the work that we're doing, and the sort of way that we've landed on the research questions, the assumptions and the methods that we've used, tell you what the outcomes of that have been, and then outline for you some next steps of how you can help us going forward. And again, just to make a shout out to the funding for this, the National Science Foundation funded a team of Cornell and Rensselaer Polytechnic faculty and staff, and including some of White's time, to do a study that focuses on CEA viability in metro areas. And so you can see more and learn more about the full breadth of work that's happening under that project at the URL that's provided. And my part of that is really focused on this idea of how do we create vibrant pathways for individuals to enter the field of controlled environment agriculture. I've actually done this type of thinking and work across all of other agricultural areas. My research program is focused primarily on field-based production, but I do tell people that I have a background in CEA production from some years ago. So I'm not totally outside of the area and the sort of technique of CEA, but what we're taking is the lessons that we've learned from doing this in other parts of the industry and applying them to CEA. I'm also really pleased and happy to announce that we just got an additional round of funding through AFRI-NIFA and the grant is titled Accelerating Workforce Development for the Controlled Environment Ag Industry. So the information we share with you today is really at the foundation of us to be able to develop these types of curricula that will serve the industry and hopefully alleviate some of your training burden and provide a skilled workforce that's going to continue today and then on into the future. So the way that we've approached this is to sort of is in an integrated way where we think about research, education, and engagement all at the same time. And for us, the research question that we're really wanting to understand is what are the critical production, technical, and professional skills that would describe an expert manager of a CEA operation. And I'll get into how we define that in a moment. Because we think that once we understand really what it takes to be an expert, that will allow us then to think about who are the individuals we want to recruit, how can we get them trained really quickly, and then connect them to the industry in effective ways. And so many of you are doing this already. You know the struggles of trying to train and retain a workforce. So how do we create a collaboration that does this in the long term? So in terms of understanding what it is that makes an expert, why we are thinking about who's an expert. Once we understand that, we feel that we can actually create a prioritized set of curricula that really respond and build up the workforce training that we want to have happen. And that all of you are really essential to that. Because in the end, we want to make sure that this type of a curricula actually would build the foundation of a set of micro-credentials or sort of walking credentials that somebody could have that would allow you to understand what are the skills that they have proven the ability in and where might they fit in your business. So how do we create a measurable test of employees' abilities in order to reduce your business training burden? So that's a bit of our goals in the way that we approach this. It's slightly different than I think other curriculum-based approaches because we are really modeling who are the experts, and those are you. So what we settled on for the theme in saying indoor agriculture was really, it encompasses all of indoor ag, whether it's sort of a greenhouse production system, a vertical farm, and all of those in between. It was too hard to sort of parse out and pick one or the other. We started initially with focus on vertical farms, but we realized when we solicited input from our experts that they actually represented businesses that were sort of a mix of light environments and a mix of production systems, but they were unified under this banner of producing an indoor environment. So trying to manage plant production, technical, and technology for monitoring and management, as well as then integrating those two together in an effective system. So we know that these are emerging fields. And so it's not just being able to be the technical expert, but the innovator that has to be also within a curriculum. Like, how do we actually do the research we need to answer the questions and to be able to think about how that fits into a business's growth? And so that's unique in CEA and something I think is really exciting about working with this industry. And so anything that we do at a university or even in industry-based sort of collaborations builds a curriculum, but that's no substitute for on-the-job training. So we see this as a complement. It's about building up those basic skills, advancing people's abilities, but then in the end, anyone who's employing them will still have to be having some sort of on-the-job training, but hopefully we will help be able to, we will increase the caliber of the applicants you draw from. So the way that we've approached this is we started with some initial descriptions and interviews with operations managers to get a sense from them as what the challenges are in hiring and retaining employees. Then we hosted a workshop that I'm going to describe in a little bit more detail, where we engaged experts from across the country, people that are recognized by their peers as being experts in managing a CEA operation, an indoor ag operation. And we kind of put them through a process that's really facilitated and proven, and I'll describe that to you. It generated a chart that is the map of their abilities. And so we'll look at that chart together. And then what we're faced again next is taking that and turning it into the actual teachable steps. And that's the curriculum piece that we're going to be working towards next with this new funding. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to White.
Sure, thanks, Anu. Just to summarize the background in our research objectives, we're trying to really understand the present workforce needs of the CEA industry, but really look at the future and assuming that CEA scales up and being a bit agnostic about what exactly farm modalities will look like, whether it will be high-tech greenhouse or fully sunless. We want to enhance the trainings and educational programs that are available to help the industry find skilled labor and make it a little bit easier to bring people on the job, knowing that they'll still be on the job training. And so because of this, we're focused on this idea of first the indoor farm operations manager as a role. And we think that when we understand that role really well, it'll help us with other related roles. So to move into the first phase of what we've done is in 2018 and 2019, we conducted a number of interviews and we solicited these based on a range of job titles. So basically anyone who was in charge of plant production and indoor farm. So we started with this idea of the vertical farm manager, but it quickly expanded and we saw that this expert group included a number of people with a range of titles. And we basically asked a series of questions. We had structured interviews, myself, my colleague Maya Ezzedine at Cornell, and Jeffrey Landau at Agritecture Consulting, who's our industry partner on this project. And we went through a number of interviews, sometimes multiple people at the same company, and tried to understand basically 5 areas, these groups of questions. So their background, what do they do all day? How do they use technology specifically? How do they relate to marketing decisions at that company? And then how do they think about continuing education? So how did they learn initially, and then how would they continue to learn or train someone else? So the companies varied that we spoke to. Some are the larger companies you may have heard of. Some were at the time very small. And the titles varied, but these are all managers who were running professional indoor farms, and they all dealt with essentially the same groups of social and technical issues. So growing plants and managing labor. And we can, we'll go through basically quickly some of their thoughts now. So these are the companies we interviewed, and many others wanted to participate, and it was basically a matter of scheduling. So we thank everyone who participated or expressed some interest. And we're now building from the interviews to other kinds of research, but again, want to go through some of the interviews to just give you a sense of that data. And you saw there was a range geographically. So this wasn't, although we serve New York State in a way, we're interested because it's an emerging industry. It's still fairly small. We tried to just contact anyone who we could speak to. So basically anyone with whom we shared a language. Okay, so backgrounds varied quite a bit in terms of who currently has this title. And on-the-job experimentation, on-the-job training was really emphasized throughout. And in terms of CEA-specific expertise, that was definitely privileged, more than any particular crop. So we did ask about, for example, would someone hiring a farm manager care, which crop the manager had experience with, and we found that in general they didn't really care, and they did rate field experience as often decent, but they really were looking for CEA specific experience. So that's something that we took away. In terms of day-to-day operations, we often heard that in some ways the horticulture aspects were not the most significant barriers for really having a smooth operation and scaling up. For these managers, they often focused on basically everything else. Not to say that they didn't think that was important, but just that was where they felt they already had some expertise. And it was we often heard that basically they were learning more on the job about management skills. And particularly this idea of farming as a service. So farms that are set up to have many smaller locations, that's a different business model. It's a different need in terms of managing labor, regardless again of the crop. With technology, we heard again that there was a huge focus on experimentation, being agnostic, and we have just a lot of great verbatims. So we're just including here, these are anonymized to either the grower, so the actual, what we came to call indoor farm operations manager, or the operator, meaning the person who hired them. So we just classed everyone as one of those two things. And we have many more statements like this. So people who were in that grower position were learning on the job and trying out different technologies, and basically learning year by year. But many companies did say that they wanted to eventually automate as much as possible, and that has to do with labor, but also quality. Growers found that they were involved, or rather we found growers were involved with making marketing decisions, particularly when it comes to crop selection. And this was where, training could be helpful, and that might be an area for more study. So that's something we're looking at now in terms of what Anu will talk about. And continuing education, this we spent a lot of time and got really varied answers in terms of how growers had come to the knowledge they possessed, and especially where they would look for new knowledge or where they would send farmhands or interns, for example, to achieve competence. And I think this is where, again, we can make some really good recommendations in terms of an industry validated curriculum or set group of curricula for achieving those competencies. And in terms of how companies were dealing with it now, we heard that this was sort of on the back burner, that many companies didn't have a very specific plan in place for providing continuing ed. They were very open to discussing. They wanted to talk about it more, but we didn't hear a lot of systematic approaches yet. So that's, again, where we think this research can help. So in terms of what are some of the things that operators were looking for when they hired farm managers for indoor farms, they again and again emphasize this need to learn on the job, be capable of what they often would call research or experiments, and just a certain way of thinking about their job, so that their job was not only knowing how to grow plants, but sort of being able to learn technical systems as well, and being able to adapt to changing labor practices. We also heard, for example, that maintenance is something that's absolutely critically important on a professional CEA farm. And that's where, to some degree, again, maybe there's an intervention to be made with training and how farm managers can train new employees to make sure that every system is maintained and quality is assured. And again, these slides will be available. So if you want to go back through, I don't want to read every single quotation at you. It'll take an hour. And then finally, this was sort of, and again, we listed this initially, Maya and myself, under surprising takeaways, but in some ways, I'm sure these are not surprising to those of you who are running CEA farms. But there is some romance with what farming can be versus the actual reality of the job. And we heard this, especially in reference to management. So bringing on new labor, staffing up, and often having people come in who might be interested in gardening, they know about growing, but they're not used to some of the other aspects of working in an indoor farm. And so with that, Anu is going to talk about the DACUM workshop, and that's really the heart of the research we've done to date.
Thanks, White. So that's a bit of a background that helped frame for us sort of the approach, as well as think about who we would want to reach out to help us with the deep dive into what is it that a indoor farm operations manager actually do. What is it that they do? So the first thing I would like to say is that our efforts here and the work that we're doing, we hope are a complement to the many amazing programs and projects that are happening, both industry-led and university-led around the country. But I tend to be a very practically oriented person, and I like to answer the question, what do you actually do? When I think about how do we think about teaching towards that? Because to me, this is sort of at the core of what we want to have in a training program, is to give people the skills and competencies needed for success, and start out with that type of language. And so what I'm going to share with you, I think, is if you're yourself actually doing a training program as part of a business already, I would invite you to explore the outcomes of this work and think about how you might adapt your own program. If you are already offering this through a university-based system program, if you're already training people for CEA, which is where I came from the Michigan State Controlled Environment Ag program, and that's where I did all of my professional work. I learned specific things there about plant sciences. But the thing that we learned through this process is that these managers are doing many more things than just growing plants. And all of you in the business would know that. And so what we wanted to do is to use a process that would flesh that out a bit more, make it a little bit more clear, and help us understand and answer this question of what do you actually do if you're an indoor farms operation manager. And so we use the DACUM process. It's called Develop a Curriculum. It's been around for a long time, and it's been used by many different industries to actually look at how to develop a training program for their staff. It's also been used to help support curriculum development at universities, to flesh out what we need to do for human resource management, for creating assessments or tests of competencies, like creating competency-based testing, for example, in the trades, to help with career advising. So it has had a bunch of different applications in the way that it's been used in other industries. In agriculture, I've used this actually to work with, and this was a new use, I used it with organic farmers to understand how they manage crop rotation. And so we unpacked all of the processes and the things that they did, the analysis that they did, in order to actually effectively manage an organic crop rotation, which meets a whole bunch of different kinds of other biological and financial goals. And so I knew that this would work, and it's an interesting application. And so what we did is we applied this to with a bunch of experts from the field. So at the core of DACUM is the assertion that expert workers can best define and describe their job. And that the most effective way is to ask these experts to actually sit down and precisely describe what it is that they do. And that will result in a list of the duties, the big buckets of work that they do, and the specific tasks, the sort of measurable items within those big buckets of work. And this lays the basis, it lays the foundation for a curriculum. And it can support the design of testing and assessment, which for us would look like perhaps micro-credentials that would be used and help anyone who's looking for employees to help identify people that might have the skill set you're looking for. And it also talks in the process, because you have a group of experts together, it's a really unique opportunity to think about all of those things that enable success. So the tools, the skills, the knowledge, the behaviors that allow for someone to be successful in the job, as well as to explore what are some trends and concerns that are facing the industry. So I like this process because it tends to be really efficient. It's quick. In other types of job analyses, it might take diaries and journaling and a lot of interviews. But when you put experts into the room, and you put their brain through a bit of a meat grinder, and I'm not sure if any of our panelists are on this call, but any one of them would be able to tell you about how we put their brains through a meat grinder. You very quickly end up with something that is the basis of, it's a really great starting point, because it is the map. It's the mind map of what these types of experts do. So we recruited 11 indoor farm operations managers, and we put them through this intensive workshop that we hosted in New York City last May. And I worked closely with the Ohio State Center for Education and Training for Employment. And so one of their trainers and I facilitated this. I'm actually trained to do this now. And we explored this title, Indoor Farm Operations Manager. And I just want to shout out with deep gratefulness for the time and energy and the contribution of our experts. These folks stuck with us through the whole process, and it wouldn't be without their commitment that we could have done this work. There were several from New York, and then some folks from, one individual from Amsterdam, Houston, Orlando, Toronto, Seattle, and Chicago. So, and I imagine many of you know the names that are on this list, but again, it's in deep gratitude for their time and energy to help us think about this for going forward. So there's going to be a couple of words that I use that I wanted to describe to you, and one is this idea of duties. So we're going to dig into that a little bit, because I want to share with you the chart, and I invite you again to, if you just went into Google and search what makes a good indoor farm operations manager, it'll pop up. But White, I think you're going to drop that into the chat as well, so that you can actually open this up at your own leisure and dig into it a little bit further. So this is, the chart represents a list of the big buckets of work, the responsibilities, those things that are, tend to be clusters of tasks, as well as then the sort of specifics, the more specific types of tasks that happen within those duties to get the job done. So this is just one page of this 3-page chart. It was an incredible team. In fact, the folks from Ohio State said this is one of the most robust and deep dives as far as a DACUM chart that they had seen. And there were, I think it was 15 different duties that were described. Manage crop rotation, manage farm labor, implement product safety plan, for example, and 125 individual tasks that were represented. So once again, let me just describe for you what these are. The duties that are in this gray column that are sort of going here vertically, they represent large sort of buckets of work and a cluster of related types of tasks. They tend to be general statements that they don't actually tell you much specificity. They're just sort of general descriptions, but they stand alone and they don't tell you much about what's needed for success. And so if you were to think about your home and just think about sort of managing your own yard, right? So if you were talking about managing your home, just as an analogy, you might say, in order to manage my home, I've got to maintain the yard. Maintaining the yard has all these different pieces to it, all these different tasks, but they contribute to, this is one of the duties that you as a homeowner have to do. So similarly, these duties are all of those various sort of things that an indoor farm's operation manager has to do, but the devil is in the detail. And so that's where we start to get into the tasks. As you work your way across the chart, and you'll see this for each one, our panel went and dove very deeply into and debated every word that you see here to describe a smaller unit of activity that represents a part of that work. And so these tasks tend to be assignable. They're things that you could actually delegate to somebody. They have a beginning and end. So a person who does this will know, like, you know, that they can actually measure, and you can measure and know when they've actually completed the work. It can be observed, it can be measured. It's not vague, it's really specific. And it can be, you can do these various tasks independent of other things. While you may have to draw data and information from other tasks, they themselves sort of sit as something that could be teachable. So I wanted to just sort of review, these are the big buckets of work that our panelists told us about. These are the duties. And you can see they run the gamut as far as those that are business specific, those are plant specific, and those are tech specific. So managing crop production, managing labor, implementing a product safety plan, so dealing with food safety issues and post-harvest processing, overseeing distribution logistics. Now, not all of these duties fell under everybody's job description, but in the room, people had this as part of their jobs. And so we did our best to capture the things that were part of people's jobs. Evaluating farm data and metrics, continuous improvement plans, implementing them. It's actually doing the research, doing that on-the-job testing and adaptation and innovation. But then it got into some of the more mundane things like managing your facilities and managing inventory, maintaining relationships. All of these are really important and important to do well, but maybe not necessarily part of a traditional training program. But yet success and the things that this manager has to do includes these types of activities. And so the chart dives into these in more specificity. And then the one that none of us likes to talk about is all those administrative tasks, but every single person has those to do, and so they have to be included. So I'm going to just share with you an example of a deeper dive into the tasks within something called managed crop production. And I hope that this helps you understand why the indoor ag operations manager was a suitable bucket, because we're not getting into the specificity of what it goes into managing crop fertigation based on the type of system that you're growing in. But we know that within that particular task, you're going to have to be doing a whole bunch of different things that could be similar and then sometimes might be different based on the business. Well, we can teach to a level of competency with essential information and skills to manage crop fertigation. So within doing that, there's a bunch of other steps, and so we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But you can see through this fairly broad collection of tasks that are part of managing crop rotation that there's a lot of really different and interesting and in some ways unique activities that may not be what a person typically thinks about as part of crop production. So managing fertigation, implementing IPM, implementing specific standard operating procedures for crops, managing logs, diagnosing disorders, creating and revising crop production plans, coordinating with sales on product supply, managing the environmental controls and programming automated tasks. And then conducting root cause analysis, like when things aren't working, to know when and how to identify that, and then actually conduct an analysis to describe and to uncover what the cause was. So this is, and you'll notice that they're all verbs and objects. They're all specific. There's very few, and we really drive for people to actually tell us exactly what it is that they do. And then we explored, and so the chart, you'll see for each of those duties, there's this kind of detail that's provided. But then we also step back a little bit and ask the question, well, what does it take for success based on knowledge? And this was their brainstorm. And at some point, it would be lovely to hear from you other knowledge that's needed to be successful in this type of a job. And so these were the broad categories of knowledge they felt that, people needed to have. And it was a little overwhelming when they sat down and they looked at this list of knowledge that they had to have. And they're like, oh my God, I really do have to do all this. Knowing plant science, understanding planting, understanding hort techniques and irrigation and lighting, dealing with regulatory organizations, understanding what, when, and where as far as compliance. These were all the types of knowledge that these individuals felt a person had to have to be successful in that title, indoor ag operations manager. And then there were skills. So you have the knowledge and then you have actual skills. Some of them are obvious ones like communication, but there's other skills that, plumbing and that are sterile technique, technical writing, to be able to actually document and describe for other people to use. These are just examples of the kinds of skills that are essential for success in this position. The other piece that I would encourage you to look at in the chart is the future trends and concerns. So in future trends and concerns, there was a fairly rich brainstorm, and I think that you have probably had these conversations in other venues, but this was our single point in time with these 11 experts. They're what was on their minds. And so a very interesting collection of issues that they're concerned about that might restrict the growth of the industry and also restrict the success of people who enter the industry. So important to provide that context relative to how we build out this type of curriculum. So here's the team, kind of a crazy collection of characters, but it was an amazing day. I think that one of the pieces that came up for me is that some of the folks that were there said and shared to me that I've never sat with my colleagues for this long to consider something so essential and important to the success of my business. And so that was an interesting it was a networking opportunity. It was a chance for people to actually share and to focus on what is it that we really want to have people be able to do if they apply to work with us. So again, I'm deeply grateful for everybody's help and support. So I'm going to pass it now back over to White.
Thanks. So that was really the heart of the work to date. After the interviews, we focused on creating the DACUM process, get through the whole chart. And now we are at the phase of validating that work. So we actually already have launched a survey, but we are inviting all of you to participate, because we've actually had a little trouble getting enough responses from people who are actual CEA farm managers. So we've got a lot of responses from people who might work on other kinds of farms or just frankly want a gift card, but we only want to give gift cards to people who complete our survey who actually hold the title of some kind of farm manager using CEA. So right now, this verification survey is live, and you can contact us and we will send you a link through Qualtrics. It's the most secure way to do it. The survey is very detailed because it asks you to go through the chart, but it's very simple. So it's not necessarily going to tax your brain. You're responding to what the chart says and essentially letting us know if you agree, disagree, and if you can tell us how often you do a task, if at all, and how important it is. And we really think this is vital because we want to be able to prioritize the tasks that we're going to go into more detail through the task analysis workshop phase, the next phase, and really build out each task in terms of teachable, measurable steps. And we can't do everything at once. We're not necessarily going to do everything in total just because there are a lot of tasks, but we want to focus on the ones that are most important, most relevant to the most members of the industry. So the survey is really straightforward, and if you take it, it'll help us out quite a bit. And really it is to help the industry. So the more industry members who take it, the more reflective it will be of the entire industry's needs. We really love our focus group last May and the people with whom we've been in contact, but we're very aware that that's a very specific group and not representative necessarily of everyone managing a CEA farm right now. Yeah, and so the next step as we close out that survey, hopefully soonish, will be to set up our task analysis workshops. We're actually already planning this phase, and this is really exciting. It's a little bit like the DACUM process, the first workshop that Anu described, but it's going to be broken down more into a series of shorter workshops, hopefully with some of the same subject matter experts, so CEA farm managers who will carry across multiple workshops. And the idea is that each workshop will take one task, and over the course of a couple of hours, go through again, a very guided way. There's a structure for this that's validated, that's used by lots of industries, big companies and other sectors use this all the time. And the goal is to come out with essentially pieces of a curriculum. So you go through each task and say, what are the steps that you can observe if you are an observer, and say this learner knows how to do that task. They did or did not do, that step correctly. And if you add up all those steps, they've completed that task. So again, to go back to the example of crop production, if we look at the task of fertigation, there are different specific things you have to do to get nutrients to your crops. What specific things do you, the expert, do on your farm? That's what we want to document using this structured process, and we will emerge with a kind of picture of, in general, those specific steps that make up that task. So it's just the next phase. It's really important, and we also are inviting people to participate in that. Again, you would contact Anu and myself, and we will work with you to schedule those workshops. So this is just sort of summarize where we are right now. We're finishing up the survey and we're setting up the task analysis workshop. So if you manage an indoor farm of some kind, could be greenhouse, could be vertical farm, or some sort of hybrid, and you're interested in this work, please contact us. Survey participants who give us your name and email, you don't have to do that, but if you do, you can get a $25 gift card. And task analysis workshop participants, you will be compensated for your time. So we're not asking you to volunteer, but we are asking you to join. And as Anu said, it's really a chance to talk with other industry members and really help a nascent industry find some collective agreement on a sort of non-competitive basis about the basic skills, the most important skills that any new hire, you would want to have them have that skill in the future. And yeah, here's a sort of summary and just widening out, the next phase of research after this DACUM process will be really to work toward that accreditation model. So the idea of maybe a micro-credential program. And that's something that Anu can talk more about and that we will come back with more updates about after we finish out what we're doing now.
Great. So I want to make sure I call out and acknowledge Agritecture Consulting. They've been a collaborator in this work, particularly Jeffrey Landa, who's worked with us really closely in all phases, and it's going to be helping us do the next part of the task analysis. And the Ohio State team, really grateful for them and all of our growers. And as I mentioned, the funding for this work has been through NSF. So that's been a real blessing to have that. And so I think at this point, we're ready. If there's some questions to add, all of these materials will be made available to anyone who's interested in building up this curriculum. Again, our goal is to support this industry as a whole and sort of elevate the depth of training as well as the breadth of training. We can't do all of that. Many of you have programs and systems that contribute to this. You already have things in place, but maybe some of these findings would help you build additional detail into that or add new modules, for example. We ourselves are going to be using the funding we have to certainly look at how we can strengthen two-year programs and community college efforts around CEA training, as well as then online platforms that can achieve the goals of doing some of this micro-credentialing, you know, to do specific tasks that are measurable, and then have people be able to go through training programs, demonstrate skills both online, but then in person through internships, apprenticeships, formalized apprenticeships, where people are really training towards that operations manager role. So I think at that point, if there's any questions, we're happy to answer them. I'm going to look in the Q&A at this point.
Hello again. Thanks, Anu. Great presentation. We do have some questions. People are using more the chat box than the Q&A. So I would suggest for everyone in the audience, if you send your questions through the Q&A, it's easy for us to track. It's just easy and we can reply everyone. I have one comment and one initial question. So it's pretty impressive how broad are the set of skills today. So one of the slides, well, so first White was talking about with the grower experience position, they should know about, they have CEA experience, but also maintenance. Those are very different things, right? If you know how to grow plants and you know the maintenance, especially indoor farms and these more high-tech greenhouses. It doesn't cut if you're just a plumber or just electrical or just mechanical. It's a combination of all of those. So it's pretty, and then within the same topic, and I would like to hear your thoughts on that. Anu, you mentioned something, one of your slides was saying that they have to know from fluid dynamics all the way to market analysis. How can one be master in all of those things? So it's pretty impressive.
It's maybe not a master of all, but it's certainly to be aware of some of this. And it was actually, these are the skills that some of the individuals draw upon in order to be successful. But it doesn't say that that has to be what everyone has, but certainly it points to the level of consideration for really being successful and the depth of knowledge that has, you know, we have to have continuously work to build our own skills and to be on top of things. And that was just one area that someone said they felt that would really help them, that they felt that helped.
I think that has to do with people's background as well, coming into running an indoor farm, because I think while everyone we invited for that focus group had experience managing an indoor farm professionally, their actual background, what they were trained in for their undergraduate, graduate degrees, if they have those, and prior ag experience really varied. So I think the fluid dynamics probably came from the person who had a master's in engineering, where the other growers who were running indoor farms didn't have that master's, so they wouldn't have thought of it that way. But I think that sometimes the same terms can be describing, different terms can be describing the same skill to some degree. So I think that's also capturing just to some degree understanding environmental engineering and, you know, plumbing. But to someone who knows, you know, more about fluid dynamics, they might be thinking of it in different terms. And that's where this process is iterative, and we can begin to align on language that's most useful. But yeah, right now we've captured just, really broad range of skills, knowledge sets. Yeah.
And I have two follow-up questions. One, it's short, and the other one is a little longer. So the first one is, with all this broad range of skills, did you find that normally all of those would follow under one person at those operations, or normally you have a lot of overlap? In one facility has 2 people, another one has 3, another one has 2, and there is this overlapping from one facility to another, and how I think, White, you just mentioned, the definition itself. You know, one facility might find one job as one set of skills, it's different on the other one, and so on. And this industry is so diverse. So did you see that, this overlapping of multiple positions doing the same?
I think it's interesting because, you know, a new business startup might have one person with all of these jobs. But as these businesses grow, they start to get split based on efficiencies and management. And so Part of it is related to the scale of the operation and the maturity of the business, I think, and the structure, like how people divide up their activities. But in the room, there were people who did all of those jobs. And it may be that they emphasize one part of that over another in their job description, but success required a knowledge in all of those areas.
Yeah,
So,
and just to emphasize, I think Anu's right that it differed by size and age of the company. So startups that were newer and smaller, the one person was a jack of all trades, whereas as the companies get bigger and they acquire more management positions who are managing more farmhands, then yeah, there are sort of divisions and technical expertise can be its own department to some degree. And then really, as you look at the future, there are a lot of companies told us, especially in the interview process, they wanted to automate a lot of that work, but not all of it is automatable it's not profitable to automate it yet. So there's some tension there as well, I think, about what will happen in the next 5 to 10 years with just, control software and hardware.
So one of the skills that I think is essential that we see come up over and over again is the ability to observe and diagnose. And that is an integrative set of skills. It's hard to put your finger on what that means, but I think in all of this, we're talking about how do you create that sort of actively observing, actively thinking, actively analyzing individual to effectively manage this complex growing environment. But then they have to turn that into sales. So being connected to the business end of it ultimately is really what we have to have happen as well. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, and gets interesting because with the amount of sensors and data collections that we have today and the power that we have, computing power, that can really augment those skills. So you can combine now just that feeling, the experience, someone just by walking and, something doesn't look good, the water is not right, the plants are not right, with all the amount of data that we have to support that, it put us in a very interesting position moving to the future. Now, Anu, you mentioned over and over about taking all this information now, you have identify, you quantify, making the definitions, and then you can create micro-credentials, you can create courses to support the workforce training for now and for the future as well. So where can we find this? Is all that you found and you have identified, is this available? So if someone wants to train the workforce or if someone wants to get training to then join the workforce, is this available today? I don't know, at Cornell, at other institutions?
Well, I do think that there's a lot of different training programs that are out there. And so I would encourage them to look at this chart that we've created and reflect on what they're offering. Because I think everyone, we're all in this together. We're trying to elevate this industry. So that's one piece of it. But we ourselves are going to turn this into some curriculum with this new grant. So we're really excited to have this collaboration, and included is Cherry Kubota on that collaboration, and some folks from 2 different community colleges, one here in New York and one in Ohio, plus other members of the industry and advisors to help us think of, once we understand those most important and most impactful tasks that these managers have to do, and we unpack those a little bit, we can build a curriculum that reflects that priority. And so that's what our intention is. And then to try it, to see what does that look like for a micro-credential, because building a set of micro-credentials requires an industry vetting in many ways. They have to really buy into and accept this. And we want to know what we don't have a structure in mind, but we want to co-create that with folks and thinking about what would it look like, and what would assure you that this person, if they come to you with this credential, you can trust that they actually can do what they say they do. That's the way it matters. So this is part of our sort of inquiry and creative process. Other industries do it, we can too.
Yeah, and I think that's so important what you mentioned. The participation of the farmers now is essential, and it's totally in their benefits, right? If they can let you know what they're looking for, what they need, what the challenges are, and working collaborative now on this, I would say this pre-competitive stage, because right now you're just making everybody together, like I mentioned, all together here. So that's very important. We get a few questions here from overseas. So I think we can, based on that, is that possible to get this information online, remotely? Or do you think, based on this set of skills that you've seen, and you mentioned the experience before, having experience growing, and not only farming, I think White mentioned CEA experience was one of the requirements.
Well, we do a lot of online teaching now. And so I do think that a lot of this curriculum will be suitable for online, but it's going to be best complemented with some hands-on. It just will. We can do all sorts of creative things online to teach people skills. We can teach people diagnostic skills. We can teach people analysis. But, you know, to integrate it and to be in an environment where you actually are taking all of this information and turning it into meaningful, important decisions, that's the part that's going to be, I think, involve some face-to-face, some mentoring, some apprenticeship, something where you're working alongside someone with more experience to help give you the breadth. So we want to create the foundation of skills and address that basic foundation that people walk into the job with. And you know, this is not the first time this type of process has been done. There are other ag industries that are using the same curriculum, expert modeled curriculum-based approach. You know, they're using this now for training, and there is the opportunity to recruit many more dollars for support for ag workforce development, because agriculture is seen as one that's not taken part in this type of workforce development in the past. We haven't asked for the support to create these types of programs. And so I'm excited to see this one turn into basically create a job book. We create something that is the measures of success. And then people will be able to go through our training. They're going to learn what they need, but then on the job, they're going to be able to tick off that they've actually demonstrated competency as well. So if you're working overseas, I think, you know, the materials that we have, and there's many others out there that are doing these types of trainings. And so I'm not saying that we're not the only ones in town. We're in some ways new to this, but what we're trying to do is add to the value of what's available.
Yeah, and just to quickly add to that, I think, because some of these questions are very specific, how do I find this information? And right now, just to clarify, we haven't published some new curriculum on the Small Farms website that says how you should train people in CEA. What we're trying to do is create this framework, this empirical foundation, so the research basis to help sort of align curricula and to test them out. So that next phase, once we do this DACUM process, will be supported by the USDA, a pilot program. And that will, again, be a specific program. There are already materials on Cornell's site. There are online classes that ON has developed. And there are others, you know, Michigan State, there's others who have online courses. But I think with some framework or job book that the industry is vetted, it might be easier in the future to align different courses that different people are offering, whether those are online or experiential, and whether they're offered by you know, a higher ed institution or by an industry member, for example. So I think, you know, a long-term goal, I don't, correct me if I'm wrong here, would be that to create that ability to sort of say this is the empirical basis for any sort of a job program in this industry. And I think, you know, that's kind of where we're at. We don't have a new curriculum that we've put out. So I see some of these questions are very specific to that. And I just wanted to make that clear. Yeah.
It's coming.
Yeah.
And what we really want, though, is industry participation in this process. None of this is going to make a hoot of difference if you're not with us. So that's really at the core of this work, and the strategy we're using is to harness and engage you in a thoughtful conversation. And you can start by, you know, helping us with the survey, telling us what's most important, most difficult. You know, what do you do most often, and what is most important to success? Because that's going to help us win how we do our deeper dive. And then if you're willing to give us some time, help us work with some other subject matter experts, and we'll facilitate it, but we'll think very carefully about what does success look like? What's the impact of an error? Like, if you did this wrong, what would that cause? What would that do to the bottom line? Unpacking these types of steps will help us really focus in on the most important things that a person has to walk out of an educational program with.
Yeah, and for people who are saying, you know, how to collaborate, that might be an opportunity. If you have, you know, CEA management experience, you could join our workshop, and that's a chance not just to tell us and help us understand what the industry needs, but also to talk to other professionals. And so part of that networking could be getting some of those answers that are specific to your company's needs. You can work with others in that capacity. You can meet other people and be on our radar. So we only know people that we already know. So if we don't know you, you might not have gotten an invitation, but it's not personal. You know, we just, are trying to organically build a network and help the industry align on this issue of the future of training. So, it's a great time to get involved at this juncture if you have the bandwidth. And yeah, we'd love to hear from you. And
our deep dive, the task analysis is we're aiming for July, the 21st to the 23rd. And so if you're willing to join us, please email us, because that's when we want to really start digging in.
It's right there. It's right there. I have one other question. So we got one question about software and automation.
Yeah.
With all these fast evolving technologies. So again, we have new sensors, new controllers, new machinery. We have everything, new software. How fast, someone in your position, Anu and White, developing the curriculum, trying to get the training, how fast you have to keep pacing to match the technology? In other words, you don't finish something now that in 2 years is outdated. So how do you deal with that challenge?
Well, it's an interesting challenge, because on one point, one part of it is that, what is the use of technology in the environment to really understand the application. And then, but the second half is, any curriculum we create, it's unfortunate, but by nature, it will always be slightly out of date of those. It's just, but when you can become part of a learning network and be part of a group of people that are sharing, their response, their assessment to these sorts of technology, it gives you a chance to stay ahead further. And so people that come through these curriculum, they're going to remain connected. They're going to be part of a larger group of people that are thinking about this. And that's one of the hardest parts of business startup, especially in this kind of a field. If you come in and you don't have those social connections, you don't have that business networks, you kind of have to learn all this stuff on your own. And that's, frankly, I think that's a shame. There's a lot of time that can be wasted, and there's things we could be doing as an industry more effectively to kind of connect. And I think like what you do, Eric, was so important to that, like keeping to build that. I think that is tricky though. It's we will keep on working to sort of any of the curriculum we build will be reevaluated on an annual basis. We do that now. We are updating every year, and so it depends on the nature of what works. Some cases this might be a 3-week intensive class. It may look like a 3-week class. Other cases it might be a 4-hour workshop. So depending on what we're trying to teach with the time that we can teach it will affect how fast it gets adapted and how fast it responds to this evolution in the industry.
Yeah, and I think it also is from a pedagogical perspective about how to point toward the places you get the answers. So we probably aren't going to develop something that's control system specific to one company's control system, because that's changing. And we want to be a little agnostic, and we're not necessarily privileging one company over another, but we want to be able to understand the skill and how that skill is acquired. And if there is a point when a learner needs to go to that company's website, or that they might offer training courses, many do, then I think it would make sense to be able to identify that point in their educational process where it links out somewhere else. So I don't think, and again, Anu, correct me if I'm wrong, we're not trying to teach everything at all, but we're trying to make sure that we understand these basics and how they connect. So where you would get the skills. And I think that reflects back to the interview process, spending a year talking to growers. Well, I've spent 6 years for my book project, but a year for this project, talking to growers. I mean, they often didn't know where to start. And so I think that that really struck me, that many growers were literally just going to YouTube and watching, how do I grow plants indoors, until they could get a job. And years later, they acquired the skills. They're now experts. But it struck me that there wasn't one central curriculum that seemed to jump out. There were definitely pieces at different universities, and yeah, many skills can't be taught through an online class anyway. But just the ability to sort of make a rational curriculum based on research from the industry, that seems like a useful activity to me.
Another part for me is that this curriculum can be translated into other languages. I'm really committed to making sure that we're recruiting diverse people into the space and making sure that we find ways for that to happen. And I currently host a lot of programs that focus on military veterans who come in with a whole lot of interesting technical skills into agriculture. And they're looking for specific places where they can be plugging in. They may not want to run a business, but they have a whole lot that they want to contribute to making agriculture thrive. But there's other communities that are working in our farms and working in our businesses that we want to be able to train and elevate as well.
Well, thank you so much, White Anu. I appreciate the time. Great conversation. I would say one more time, if you want to maybe type or just say how they can get in touch with you, and for those who are interested in participating. So White, you make a call for people to reach out to you and let them know if you want to participate. Maybe if you want to send me these, I can send, there's a follow-up email that will go to everyone. I can make sure I include that information. So then if there are growers out there who wants to participate and are a good fit, we can make sure they connect with both of you.
Great, and thank you all for tuning in. We're excited to be working and invite your collaboration.
Yeah, and the slides will go out with all the details, right? So it's, but I just put our emails in. If you're interested in the survey or the task analysis workshops coming up, email us and we'll talk to you. And yeah, thank you. If you have questions, reach out. Thank you.
Right, thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Good afternoon, everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you.